The Millionaire changes the life of the pregnant black beggar woman abandoned in the park. Chicago, November. Bitter cold. Mark Thornton, a name whispered in the city's elite circles, a self-made millionaire, haunted by ghosts only he could see. He found her huddled on a bench in Millennium Park, a young black woman, pregnant, alone, Sarah Jenkins. Her eyes, wide with a fear that cut deeper than the wind chill, told a story of betrayal, abandonment, and a fight for survival that no one should have to face. Richard, the ex, a lowlife who vanished the second he heard the word baby. Gone. Just like that. Mark saw something in Sarah. A flicker of a pain he knew all too well. Years ago, he lost his own family in a tragic accident, a wound that never truly healed. Now, staring at this young woman shivering in the cold, he felt a pull, an unexpected urge to help. He offered her a warm place, one of his fancy condos downtown, a lifeline in the storm. Hesitantly, fiercely independent, Sarah accepted, a temporary haven. But there was something about Mark, a quiet sadness, a hidden strength that drew her in. He got her medical care, made sure she was eating. They started talking, sharing stories, though Mark kept his past carefully guarded. Then came Tiffany, Mark's ex, business partner, a woman with claws. She called, a venomous warning in her voice. Be careful, Mark. That girl, she's not who she seems. This could open a can of worms you don't want to touch. Old secrets, buried deep. She reminded him of the charity gala, his reputation, the stakes. Doubt crept in. Later that night, Sarah asked about his past. He hesitated, mumbled something about a marriage, an accident. She didn't push, but the air hung heavy with unspoken words. As she slept, Mark stared out at the city lights, a knot forming in his stomach. Who was Sarah Jenkins? What was Tiffany so afraid of? And was he ready to risk his heart again? Or would the ghosts of yesterday destroy this fragile new beginning? The city held its breath, waiting. Ei, antes de continuarmos com essa história incrível, preciso te fazer um alerta importante. Muitos inscritos têm relatado que o YouTube removeu suas inscrições sem aviso. Dá só uma conferida rápida no botão vermelho aí embaixo para garantir que você ainda está inscrito no canal. Não quero que você perca nenhum conteúdo exclusivo que vem por aí. E já que você está aí, deixa aquele like poderoso que me ajuda muito com o algoritmo. Ah, e me conta nos comentários de qual cidade você está assistindo. Adoro conhecer cada pessoa incrível que faz parte dessa comunidade. Sua participação faz toda a diferença. Vamos interagir. The city held its breath, waiting. The next morning, Sarah was different. Not obviously, but subtly. She was quieter, more withdrawn. Mark chalked it up to the late night, the stress. He made her pancakes, her favorite, with extra blueberries. She smiled, a genuine one this time. And for a second, the knot in his stomach loosened. Then the doorbell rang. It was the cops, 2 of them, looking grim, detectives. Mark Thornton? The taller one asked, flashing a badge. We need to ask you some questions about Sarah Jenkins. Mark felt a chill. Tiffany, she'd done something. What's this about? It's about a homicide, Mr. Thornton. A missing person case, now presumed dead. His world tilted. He looked at Sarah, who'd come to the doorway. Her face was blank, empty. "Sarah Jenkins?" the female detective said, her voice softer. "Is that your real name?" And that's when it happened. Sarah laughed, a cold, brittle sound that didn't belong in her body. "My real name? Oh, honey, you wouldn't believe it." She reached into her purse, pulled out a gun. Not a small purse pistol, but a serious, heavy-looking piece. She pointed it at Mark. His blood ran cold. "You see, Marky," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Sarah Jenkins was my sister, my sweet, innocent sister. And Richard, he didn't just vanish. I made him vanish." Mark stared, dumbfounded. The sweet, pregnant girl he'd taken in was a killer? Richard was the fall guy, the patsy. But you, Mark, you were the target all along. Her eyes glittered with a hatred that burned hotter than any Chicago winter. The female detective went for her weapon. Sarah, no, whoever she was too fast. A shot rang out, the sound deafening in the close space. The detective crumpled to the floor. "Don't move," the male cop yelled, his gun trained on her. She didn't. She just kept her eyes locked on Mark. "Remember that accident, Mark? The one that took your family? It wasn't an accident." His breath hitched. "What? My father worked for your company. He found out about your little accounting discrepancies. You silenced him. And you silenced my sister and her family when they started asking questions." The room swam. He remembered the news reports, the speculation. He'd always believed it was a faulty brake line. "I'm all that's left, Mark, and I'm here to collect what's owed." She took a step closer, the gun still pointed at his heart. The cop didn't fire. Maybe he was afraid of hitting Mark. Maybe he was just as shocked as he was. Then another voice, a new voice. "Put the gun down, Lisa." Standing in the doorway, looking pale but determined, was Tiffany. But it wasn't just Tiffany. Next to her stood Richard, the vanished Richard, and he was holding a baby. "It's over," Tiffany said, her voice trembling. "It's been over for a long time." Lisa's face twisted in rage. "You!" she screamed at Richard. "I should have known you were weak." But Richard wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Mark, and he said, in a voice that was barely a whisper, "She's lying, Mark, about the accident, about everything. She's crazy." Lisa spun around, the gun wavering. Then she did something no one expected. She pressed the gun to her own stomach. "You want to play dirty, Mark? Let's see how you like this." Before anyone could react, she pulled the trigger. The bullet tore through her. Not a clean shot, but messy, brutal. She gasped, a wet, choking sound, and crumpled to the floor. Silence. Then, the male cop was yelling, barking orders into his radio. Richard was staring, mouth agape, the baby clutched tight against his chest. Tiffany was just standing there, frozen. Mark couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He stared at Lisa, lying in a pool of blood, her eyes wide, unseeing. Pregnant. She was pregnant. Suddenly, a wave of nausea hit him. He stumbled back, clutching his head. This was insane. But then, something even more insane happened. Lisa, still alive, started to laugh. A gurgling, bubbling laugh that sent shivers down Mark's spine. You think that stops me?" she rasped, blood trickling from her lips. "You think death can stop me? She struggled to sit up, her face contorted in pain and fury. With a Herculean effort, she reached into her coat, her bloody hand fumbling for something, and she pulled it out. Not a gun, a phone. She dialed a number, the screen flickering in the dim light. She held it to her ear, the gurgling laugh continuing. "It's done," she whispered into the phone. The contingency. Initiate now." Then she went limp. Finally, silent. The cop rushed to her side, checking for a pulse. "She's gone," he said, his voice grim. Mark was still reeling, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. But then the room started to shake. Not a little tremor, a violent, earth-shattering quake. The building groaned, the lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. Screams erupted from the street outside. "What the hell is going on?" the cop yelled, his voice barely audible above the din. Tiffany grabbed Mark's arm, her grip like a vice. "We have to get out of here, now!" But as they stumbled towards the door, the ceiling began to crack. Dust and debris rained down, and then, with a deafening roar, a huge chunk of concrete came crashing down, blocking their exit. They were trapped. Mark looked at Tiffany, his eyes wide with terror. "What was that? What's happening?" Tiffany's face was ashen. She did it. She triggered it." "Trigger what?" Tiffany took a shaky breath. "Remember that building? The one you wanted to build on the old Jenkins property? The one everyone said was unstable, built on a sinkhole?" Mark's blood ran cold. "She knew," Tiffany whispered, her voice barely audible. "She knew it was going to collapse. She rigged it. She rigged the whole damn city." Richard was whimpering, clutching the baby tighter. The air grew thick with dust, and then a voice, booming from somewhere above, filled the room. "Hello, Chicago. This is Lisa Jenkins, speaking from beyond the grave. You thought you could bury my family? You thought you could get away with it? Think again. Welcome to your reckoning." The voice was distorted, amplified, echoing throughout the collapsing building. And then the ground beneath them started to give way. Mark grabbed Tiffany's hand, pulling her close. He looked at Richard, at the baby, at the crumbling walls around them. He had no idea what was happening. He had no idea who Lisa Jenkins really was. But one thing was clear. This was just the beginning. "Hello, Chicago. This is Lisa Jenkins, speaking from beyond the grave. You thought you could bury my family? You thought you could get away with it? Think again. Welcome to your reckoning." The voice was distorted, amplified, echoing throughout the collapsing building. And then, the ground beneath them started to give way. Mark grabbed Tiffany's hand, pulling her close. He looked at Richard, at the baby, at the crumbling walls around them. He had no idea what was happening. He had no idea who Lisa Jenkins really was. But one thing was clear. This was just the beginning. Suddenly, the floor cracked open. Not just a little crack. A gaping hole swallowed Richard and the baby whole. Gone. Just like that. Tiffany screamed. A sound that was lost in the roar of the collapsing building. Mark felt his heart stop. Richard, the baby. Then Tiffany started coughing, a wet, rattling cough. She looked at Mark, her eyes wide with fear. Mark, I have to tell you something. He stared at her, dust and debris raining down around them. What could possibly be worse than this? That baby, it's not Richard's. Mark frowned. What was she talking about? It's yours, Mark. The world tilted again. His? Impossible. He and Tiffany hadn't, not in years. Years ago, Tiffany gasped, her face streaked with dirt and blood. Before the accident, before everything went to hell, we were still together. Remember that weekend in Vegas? He remembered, barely, a drunken haze of roulette and cheap champagne. I got pregnant. I didn't tell you. I couldn't. Not then. You were already with your wife. His head was spinning. Richard's raising his child? Lisa's knowing all along? I told Richard it was his. He loved that baby, Mark. He really did. The building groaned again, a sound like a dying beast. Tiffany's eyes pleaded with him. Promise me you'll protect him. Promise me you'll find him. Mark couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. His son, lost in the rubble. Suddenly, the ground lurched again. Tiffany screamed. Then her eyes rolled back in her head. She went limp in his arms. Tiffany! He shook her, desperate. Nothing. She was gone. He was alone, trapped in a collapsing building, with the knowledge that he had a son. Somewhere in the wreckage. Then another voice. This one was inside his head. Don't worry, Daddy. I'm here. Mark gasped, stumbling back. He looked around, wild-eyed. Who said that? Down here, Daddy. Come find me. He looked down at the gaping hole where Richard and the baby had fallen. The darkness seemed to beckon him. Was he going crazy? Hallucinating? He didn't care. He had to find his son. Without hesitation, Mark Thornton, millionaire, haunted by ghosts, jumped into the abyss. Mark Thornton, millionaire, haunted by ghosts, jumped into the abyss. It was dark, completely, utterly dark, and cold. The air was thick with dust, making it hard to breathe. He landed hard, hitting something soft. He groaned, pushing himself up. What had he landed on? He fumbled for his phone. The screen cracked, but still flickering with a sliver of battery life. He turned on the flashlight and screamed. He wasn't lying on rubble. He wasn't lying on debris. He was lying on bodies. Dozens of them, piled on top of each other, a grotesque monument to the disaster. Their faces contorted in terror. He scrambled away, gagging. This was hell. Hello? He croaked, his voice trembling. Richard? Anyone? Silence. He moved forward, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the gloom. The air was getting thinner, harder to breathe. He had to find Richard. He had to find his son. Then he saw something, a flicker of movement in the distance. He ran towards it, ignoring the pain in his legs, the burning in his lungs. Richard! He yelled. Richard! It's me, Mark! The flickering grew stronger. As he got closer, he could make out a figure, small, hunched over. He reached the figure. It was Richard, but he wasn't holding the baby. Richard was kneeling on the ground, his head in his hands, sobbing. Richard? Mark said, his voice gentle. Where's the baby? Where's my son? Richard looked up, his face streaked with tears and dirt. His eyes were wild, unfocused. He's gone, Mark, he sobbed. He's gone. Mark's heart stopped. Gone? What do you mean, gone? Where is he? Richard just shook his head. his sobs intensifying. Mark grabbed him by the shoulders, shaking him hard. "Tell me, Richard, where is my son?" Richard looked up at Mark, his eyes filled with a dawning horror. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Then, a voice, a small, weak voice. "Daddy?" Mark froze. He knew that voice. He'd heard it in his head just before he jumped. He looked around, searching for the source. And then he saw it. Behind Richard, hidden in the shadows, was a child. But not a baby. A little girl. She was small, thin, and covered in dust. But her eyes were clear, bright, and intelligent. "Daddy?" she said again, her voice stronger this time. Mark stared at her, dumbfounded. Who are you?" he stammered. The little girl smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "I'm Lisa," she said. "Lisa Jenkins." Mark's blood ran cold. Lisa Jenkins? But Lisa Jenkins was dead. She was a pregnant woman who had just tried to kill him. "That's not possible," he said, shaking his head. You're just a little girl." The little girl giggled, a high-pitched, chilling sound. "Oh, Daddy," she said, "you have no idea what's possible." She took a step closer to Mark, her eyes gleaming in the darkness. "Don't you see, Daddy?" she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I've always been here. I've always been watching you." She reached out her hand and touched Mark's cheek. Her touch was ice cold. "And now," she said, her smile widening, "now it's time to play." Then the ground beneath them started to shake again, harder this time. The entire tunnel seemed to be collapsing. Richard screamed. Mark just stared at the little girl, at Lisa Jenkins. His mind raced. What was happening? How was this possible? Then it hit him. The voice in his head, the tremors, the little girl's knowledge. Lisa Jenkins wasn't just crazy. She wasn't just seeking revenge. She was something else entirely. Something supernatural. And he was trapped in a collapsing building with her. The shaking intensified. The walls started to crumble. Mark knew he had to get out. He had to escape. But he couldn't leave his son. And he couldn't shake the feeling that escaping Lisa Jenkins was going to be the hardest thing he had ever done. Because the building wasn't just collapsing. It was reacting to her. To Lisa. "It's time to go, Daddy," she said, grabbing his hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. She led him towards a dark opening in the wall, a passage he hadn't noticed before. "Where are we going?" Mark asked, his voice trembling. Lisa just smiled. "To the beginning," she said, "where it all started." And then she pulled him into the darkness, leaving Richard behind. "Wait!" Richard screamed, his voice echoing in the collapsing tunnel. "Don't leave me!" But it was too late. Mark and Lisa were gone, swallowed by the darkness. And as the tunnel collapsed behind them, Richard was left alone, to face whatever horrors awaited him. But little did he know, the real horror was yet to come. Because Lisa Jenkins wasn't just taking Mark to the beginning. She was taking him to hell. Mark and Lisa were gone, swallowed by the darkness. Richard screamed. But little did he know, the real horror was yet to come. Because Lisa Jenkins wasn't just taking Mark to the beginning. She was taking him to hell. The darkness pressed in on Mark, thick and suffocating. He stumbled. Lisa's grip surprisingly strong, pulling him forward. The air was heavy with the smell of dust and something else, something acrid, like burnt metal. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice a strained whisper. Lisa just giggled, the sound echoing eerily in the narrow passage. "You'll see, Daddy, you'll see." They walked for what felt like hours, the passage winding downwards, ever downwards. The temperature rose steadily, until Mark was sweating despite the chill of the dust. He could hear the faint sounds of dripping water and the occasional scuttling of something. Finally, the passage opened into a vast cavern. Mark gasped. The cavern was illuminated by a strange orange glow that seemed to emanate from the very rocks themselves. In the center of the cavern was a gaping pit, filled with what looked like molten lava. The heat was intense, almost unbearable. "Welcome home, Daddy," Lisa said, her voice dripping with malice. Mark looked around, his mind reeling. This wasn't just a cavern, it was a hellscape. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lisa just laughed. "This is where it all began, Daddy. This is where you made your deal." "My deal? What are you talking about?" Lisa pointed to the pit of lava. "Remember that land you wanted to build on? The Jenkins property? You knew it was unstable. You knew it was dangerous. But you didn't care, did you? You just wanted to make money." Mark's stomach churned. He did remember. There were rumors, warnings, but he'd ignored them. "You made a deal with the devil, Daddy," Lisa said, her voice rising. "You sacrificed my family for your own greed." "That's not true," Mark protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Lisa stepped closer to the pit, the orange glow reflecting in her eyes. "Oh, it's true, Daddy, and now it's time to pay the price." Suddenly, the ground began to shake again, but this time, it wasn't just the building collapsing. It was the earth itself. The walls of the cavern began to crumble, sending rocks and debris crashing down around them. The pit of lava began to bubble and churn, sending plumes of smoke and ash into the air. "What's happening?" Mark screamed. Lisa just smiled. "The deal is being finalized, Daddy. Your soul is about to be claimed." And then the earth opened up. Not just a crack, not just a hole. The entire cavern floor split apart, revealing a chasm of unimaginable depth. From the depths of the chasm, a figure began to rise. A figure of pure darkness, wreathed in flames. Its eyes burned like coals, and its mouth was a gaping maw filled with razor-sharp teeth. The figure looked at Mark, and a voice boomed through the cavern, a voice that resonated with pure evil. "Mark Thornton," the voice said, "your time has come." Mark froze, paralyzed with fear. This was it. This was the end. But then, something unexpected happened. Lisa stepped in front of Mark, her small body shielding him from the demonic figure. "He's mine," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "You can't have him." The demonic figure laughed, a sound that sent shivers down Mark's spine. "You? A mere child? What can you possibly do to stop me?" Lisa smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "I'm not just a child," she said. "I'm Lisa Jenkins, and I'm about to tear your world apart." She raised her hand, and the cavern began to tremble even more violently. The pit of lava erupted, sending a wave of molten rock towards the demonic figure. The figure roared in anger, its flames flaring even brighter. It lunged towards Lisa, its claws outstretched. But Lisa didn't flinch. She just stood there, smiling. And then everything went black. Mark woke up, lying on a cold, hard surface. He was disoriented, confused. He looked around. He was in a hospital bed. A doctor rushed over to him, his face etched with concern. "Mr. Thornton, you're awake. How do you feel?" "Where am I?" Mark asked, his voice hoarse. "What happened?" "You were found in the wreckage of that building collapse," the doctor said. "You were lucky to survive. You were in a coma for several days." "Lisa," Mark said. "Where's Lisa?" The doctor frowned. "Lisa, there was no one else found with you, Mr. Thornton. Just you." Mark's blood ran cold. No one else? But Lisa had been there. She had saved him. Or had she? Maybe it had all been a hallucination. A nightmare brought on by the trauma of the collapse. But then he saw it. Lying on the bedside table, next to his water glass, was a small white flower. A flower he'd never seen before. He picked it up, examining it closely. As he did, a voice echoed in his head. "Thank you, Daddy." Mark gasped, dropping the flower. He looked around the room, his heart pounding. He was alone, but he knew, deep down, that he wasn't. Lisa was still out there, somewhere, and she wasn't finished with him yet. Because as he stared at the flower, he realized something else. It wasn't just a flower. It was a seed, and it was planted inside him. What kind of seed? What was it growing? He felt suddenly sick, clutching his stomach, as he realized that whatever deal Lisa had made, whatever hell she had dragged him through, it wasn't about revenge at all. It was about something far, far worse. It was about new life, his new life, and he was terrified. He felt suddenly sick, clutching his stomach as he realized that whatever deal Lisa had made, whatever hell she had dragged him through, it wasn't about revenge at all. It was about something far, far worse. It was about new life, his new life, and he was terrified. Days blurred. Doctors ran tests, asked questions. He played along, a good patient. He ate, slept, even managed a weak smile for the nurses. But inside, he was a mess. The seed, what was it doing? Then came the dreams. Vivid, horrifying dreams. Of Lisa, of the collapsing building, of the demonic figure in the lava pit. But they weren't just memories. They were growing, changing. The lava pit wasn't just a pit anymore. It was a womb, and something was gestating inside. One morning, he woke up screaming. The nurse rushed in, concerned. "Mr. Thornton, are you all right?" He just stared at her, his chest heaving. He couldn't tell her. He couldn't tell anyone. They'd think he was crazy. He had to get out. He had to understand what was happening. That afternoon, he discharged himself, against doctor's orders. He didn't care. He had to find answers. He went to the Jenkins property, or what was left of it. The building was gone, a gaping hole in the city skyline. A construction crew was already there, clearing debris, preparing to rebuild. He watched them for hours, a hollow ache in his chest. He'd destroyed lives. He'd chased money. And for what? Then he saw her, standing on the edge of the construction site, watching him. Lisa, not the little girl from the tunnels, Not the pregnant woman with the gun. This Lisa was different. Older, stronger, beautiful. She smiled at him, a sad, knowing smile. He walked towards her, his legs trembling. "Lisa?" he said, his voice barely audible. She nodded. "Hello, Mark." What's happening to me?" he asked, his voice pleading. "What did you do to me?" She reached out and touched his face, her touch gentle. "I gave you a gift, Mark, a chance to start over." "Start over? By making me a host for whatever that thing is?" Her smile faded. "It's not a thing, Mark. It's hope. A new beginning." "Hope by destroying everything?" She sighed. "Sometimes, Mark, you have to tear things down to build them back up. Better, stronger." He stared at her, confused. "But the people who died?" "They were sacrifices, Mark. Necessary sacrifices." He recoiled, horrified. "You're insane!" She just shook her head. "No, Mark. I'm awake. And now you will be too." She turned to leave. "Lisa, wait!" he called after her. "Please, tell me what's going on." She stopped, turned back. Her eyes were filled with a strange light. "There's something you need to know, Mark," she said, her voice low. "Something I haven't told you." He waited, his breath held tight. "Richard, the man you saw die, the one who was raising your child, he wasn't really dead." Mark's world tilted again. "What? But I saw him fall." "I saw him." Lisa's expression turned grave. "He was a pawn, Mark, just like you. But he served his purpose. He was taken. Somewhere safe." "Where?" Lisa stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. "He's the one carrying the baby, Mark. Not some demon, not you. The seed you felt, it's not growing inside you. It's growing inside him. He's pregnant." The ground seemed to dissolve beneath Mark's feet. "Richard? Pregnant? A man?" Lisa watched him, her expression unreadable. "He's the new beginning. Mark, not you. You were just the catalyst. Now I need you to help me protect him." Before Mark could even begin to process the insane reality that had just been thrust upon him, Lisa grabbed his hand, her grip firm. "Come on," she said, pulling him along. "We don't have much time. They know we're here." "Who knows? Who are they?" Mark stammered, trying to keep up. Lisa didn't answer. She just kept running, pulling him through the streets of Chicago, towards an unknown future. A future where the man he thought was dead was carrying his child. A pregnant man. His world had officially turned upside down. And he had absolutely no idea what to do next. Lisa didn't answer. She just kept running, pulling him through the streets of Chicago, towards an unknown future. A future where the man he thought was dead was carrying his child. A pregnant man. His world had officially turned upside down, and he had absolutely no idea what to do next. They ran, Lisa pulling him down alleyways, across busy intersections, her grip never faltering. He tried to ask questions, but she just shushed him, her eyes darting around nervously. It was like they were being hunted. Finally, they reached an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Lisa punched in a code on a keypad, and the heavy metal door groaned open. Inside it was dimly lit and smelled of dust and oil. "Where are we?" Mark asked, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Safe for now," Lisa said, her voice tight. "But not for long." She led him through a maze of crates and machinery to a small room in the back. Inside, a man was sitting on a cot, his head in his hands. It was Richard. He looked up when they entered, his eyes wide with fear. He was pale and thin, and there was a noticeable bulge under his oversized t-shirt. "Richard," Mark said, his voice a mix of disbelief and relief. "You're alive!" Richard just stared at him, his eyes filled with a strange mix of fear and resentment. "What's going on, Lisa?" Mark asked, turning to her. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" Lisa sighed. "There wasn't time, Mark, and you wouldn't have believed me anyway." She turned to Richard, her expression softening. "How are you feeling?" Richard shrugged. "Scared," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't understand any of this." "It's okay," Lisa said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure it out. Together." Mark watched them, feeling like an outsider. What had he gotten himself into? Then, suddenly, the lights flickered and died. The warehouse plunged into darkness. "What was that?" Mark asked, his heart pounding. "They found us," Lisa said, her voice grim. "It's time to go." She grabbed a flashlight from a nearby table and handed it to Mark. "Stay close," she said, "and be ready for anything." She led them out of the room and back into the maze of crates and machinery. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of their own breathing. Then, a noise, a faint scraping sound, coming from the far end of the warehouse. Lisa stopped, her hand raised. "They're here," she whispered. "Get ready." She pulled a gun from her waistband, hand trembling. He hadn't held a gun in years. The scraping sound grew louder, closer. Then, a figure emerged from the darkness. Tall, imposing, dressed in black. "Hello, Lisa," the figure said, his voice smooth and menacing. "It's been a long time." Lisa stepped forward, her gun raised. "What do you want, Victor?" Victor chuckled. "Just what you promised me, Lisa. The child." Mark stared at the figure, his mind racing. Who was this guy? What did he want with Richard's baby? Then, Lisa did something that shocked him to his core. She lowered her gun. "He's all yours, Victor," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Mark stared at her, his mouth agape. "Lisa, what are you doing?" She didn't answer. She just stepped aside, allowing Victor to approach Richard. Victor smiled, a cold, cruel smile. "Thank you, Lisa," he said. "You've made the right choice." He reached out and grabbed Richard by the arm, pulling him towards him. Richard struggled, but Victor was too strong. "No!" Mark yelled, finally finding his voice. "Let him go!" He raised his gun and pointed it at Victor. But before he could pull the trigger, Lisa stepped in front of him. "Don't, Mark," she said, her voice pleading. "You don't understand." "Understand what? That you're betraying us?" Lisa shook her head. "It's not like that, Mark. I'm doing this for you, for all of us." "For us? By handing Richard over to this monster?" Lisa sighed. "There's something you need to know, Mark," she said. "Something I've been hiding from you." She paused, her eyes filled with a strange sadness. "Victor, he's my father." The warehouse fell silent. Mark stared at Lisa, his mind unable to comprehend what he had just heard. Her father? The man who was about to steal his child? Everything he thought he knew about Lisa, about the entire situation, had just been shattered. He felt like he was drowning, lost in a sea of lies and deceit. Then Victor spoke, his voice cutting through the silence. Enough, Lisa. We have what we came for. Let's go. He turned to leave, dragging Richard with him. Mark watched them go, his gun still raised, his mind paralyzed with confusion and betrayal. But as he watched Lisa's father disappear into the darkness, he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let them take his child. Even if it meant going against Lisa, even if it meant facing the truth about who she really was. He lowered his gun, took a deep breath, and ran after them, leaving Lisa standing alone in the darkness, her eyes filled with tears. The ultimate betrayal. He lowered his gun, took a deep breath, and ran after them, leaving Lisa standing alone in the darkness, her eyes filled with tears. The ultimate betrayal. Mark burst through the warehouse doors, blinking against the sudden glare of the streetlights. He spotted Victor dragging Richard towards a black SUV parked at the curb. "Hey, let him go!" Mark yelled, his voice cracking. Victor ignored him, shoving Richard into the back seat. He slammed the door and turned, his eyes cold and menacing. "You should have stayed out of this, Thornton," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Mark didn't hesitate. He charged, throwing a wild punch that connected with Victor's jaw. Victor stumbled back, surprised. Mark lunged again, fueled by adrenaline and desperation. He had to get Richard back. He had to protect his child. They grappled, trading blows. Mark was outmatched. Victor was bigger, stronger. But Mark fought with a ferocity he didn't know he possessed. He landed a lucky kick to Victor's stomach, sending him sprawling. He didn't wait. He ran to the SUV, yanked open the back door. Richard was inside, huddled in the corner, his face white with fear. He looked up at Mark, his eyes pleading. "Get out, Richard!" Mark yelled. "Run!" Richard hesitated, then scrambled out of the car. Mark grabbed his hand, and they ran. They ran as fast as they could, away from the SUV, away from Victor, away from whatever the hell was going on. They didn't stop running until they reached a deserted park several blocks away. They collapsed onto a bench, gasping for air. "What's happening, Mark?" Richard sobbed. "I don't understand." Mark looked at him, his heart aching. He had to tell him the truth. He had to tell him everything. "It's complicated, Richard," he said, his voice strained. "But the important thing is that you're safe now." He reached out and placed a hand on Richard's stomach. "And so is our child." Richard flinched at his touch. "Our child?" he said, his voice filled with a mix of confusion and disbelief. "What are you talking about?" Mark took a deep breath. "Lisa, she told me. She said you're carrying my baby." Richard stared at him, his mouth agape. That's impossible," he stammered. "I'm a man." "I know," Mark said. "But Lisa said." Suddenly, Richard gasped, clutching his stomach. "Oh, God," he groaned, his face contorting in pain. Something's happening." Mark panicked. "What is it? What's wrong?" Richard doubled over, his body shaking uncontrollably. I don't know. It hurts. It really hurts." Then something truly impossible happened. Richard's body began to change. His features softened, his jawline rounded, his Adam's apple disappeared. His chest began to swell, pushing against his t-shirt. Mark watched in horror as Richard transformed before his very eyes, morphing into a woman. a beautiful woman, writhing in agony. "What the hell?" Mark whispered, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. Then the woman screamed, a long, piercing scream that echoed through the night. And from her womb, something burst forth. Not a baby, but a creature. A grotesque, monstrous creature, covered in blood and slime. It had sharp teeth, clawed hands, and eyes that glowed with an eerie green light. The creature landed on the ground, hissing and snarling. It turned its gaze towards Mark, its eyes filled with hatred. Then it spoke. "Hello, Daddy," it said, its voice a distorted, demonic growl. "I'm home." The creature, it grinned, a wet, glistening grin that showed rows of needle-sharp teeth. Mark's blood ran cold. This wasn't a new beginning. This was a nightmare. The thing lunged. Mark stumbled back, scrambling to his feet. He had to protect Richard. No, the woman, from this abomination. But how? Then a voice, a familiar voice, filled with power. "Get behind me, Mark." Lisa. She stepped forward, her eyes glowing with an unearthly light. She raised her hands, and the air crackled with energy. "This ends now," she said, her voice resonating with authority. The creature hissed, recoiling from Lisa's power. It lunged again, faster this time, but Lisa was ready. She unleashed a torrent of energy, striking the creature head-on. The creature screamed, a sound that tore through the night. It writhed in agony, its body contorting into grotesque shapes. Then, with a final shuddering gasp, it dissolved into dust. Silence. Mark stared at Lisa, awestruck. What was she? What was she capable of? She turned to him, her eyes softening. "It's over, Mark," she said, her voice gentle. "You're safe now." He looked at her, his heart filled with gratitude and fear. "But what was that thing?" Lisa sighed. "A mistake, a consequence of playing God." She knelt beside the woman, who was still unconscious, her body slowly returning to its original male form. "What will happen to him? To her?" Mark asked, his voice trembling. Lisa smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "He'll be okay. He'll be different, but he'll be okay." She looked at Mark, her expression serious. "You have a choice to make, Mark. You can go back to your old life, pretend this never happened, or you can stay and help me fix what I've broken." Mark hesitated. He'd seen things, experienced things that no one would ever believe. Could he really go back to his old life? Could he really walk away from Lisa? He looked at Richard, lying helpless on the ground. He looked at Lisa, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and weariness. He knew what he had to do. "I'll stay," he said, his voice firm. Lisa smiled. "Good," she said, "because the real work is just beginning." She looked up at the sky, her eyes scanning the horizon. "They're coming," she said, "and they're not going to be happy." "Who are they? What real work is it? You have to know. You need to subscribe now to this channel so you don't miss any of these exclusive stories. Smash that like button right now to feed the algorithm with your support, and make sure we can keep bringing you these insane stories. You've got to flood the comment section with all your reactions and theories about that crazy ending. Don't wait another second to share this video with at least 5 friends who desperately need to know what just happened. This is the moment to show your support. Only true fans understand. We're waiting for you. The mystery continues.